So yeah, let's get started. Today we're going to talk about stability strategies. Yesterday we spoke about mobility strategies. Stability is kind of a term that can mean a lot of things, and in our world we've kind of been changing the way we talk about it to explain it more like motor control. I think most of the general population understands, is still talking about it as stability, so we'll use that word. But we've really kind of used motor control because it encompasses a lot more things rather than just, um, you know, uh, glute exercises where we're just working on isolating the glute or isolating the core or isolating the shoulders. It's kind of like encompasses a whole lot more when we use the term motor control. So, um, you know, why stability or motor control? Why do we need it? What makes it important? I think one of the things that people miss when it comes to stability training is that it's not strength. When people think of stability, they think, well, if I just strengthen my glutes and strengthen my core and strengthen my shoulders, I'll be more stable. And that's just not how the body works. The body works through lots of different systems, as we talked about yesterday with mobility. Yes, we do have a mechanical part to us where we have bones and muscle structures and tendons and things that move biomechanically. But there are also a lot of other systems that control that, like our nervous system, like even our digestive system, circulatory system, the nerves, and kind of how all that, how we're feeling our environment and the ground. Like that's going to tell us if we're able to stabilize well. Being in good positions and postures, that's all relative to having stabilization, balance, or motor control. So just to say that I think I always use the term, like, we think we're just this like bag of muscles and bones walking around and we can just tell those bones and muscles to do whatever we want them to do. Sometimes you can have someone who has great range of motion where they can hold a plank for 2 days or do glute bridges for forever, and they're super strong and stable on a table. But then you put them on an athletic field and they go to cut, or they go to do a more complex exercise, and their knees buckle, or their posture, they lose their posture. They go to throw something and their shoulder is just not stabilizing, in the joint and able to control through that range of motion, and they get injured. So I think it's important to kind of distinguish the difference between stability and strength. It's reflex based. It's more, it kind of goes back to how we learned movement in the beginning, which is, we didn't have a movement coach. Nobody, I have a 1-year-old here, and I didn't, hire a coach, and I don't work with him every day on his crawling and his ability to move. Like, he's just figuring it out on his own. It's kind of like the original operating system. He's going to explore, look for toys, climb up on stuff. And that's really how he's developing his stabilization. He started out super mobile, right? Babies can put their feet in their mouth and they can, stretch their bodies into all kinds of shapes. And then gradually, as they progress along this exploration, they start to develop stabilization. They can roll over, they can move their neck differently, they can reach for stuff. They can get to half kneeling, full kneeling. They can pull them, crawl and have their spine in a suspended position for a while. And then they can start getting their hands up on stuff. Even sitting, when they sit down on their butt, there's compression on their spine because of gravity, and they're able to develop those little stabilizer muscles. And that's gradually how we build that into the system. Then over time, as we age, we start to kind of add too much stabilization and too much tightness and rigidity into the system. And that's the case where we have to start to increase mobility and change really, or how we can move around the things that we already learned. So when we talk about the different systems that are going to be at play when we talk about stabilization, we have the deep stabilizers. So the things like the muscles that are in and around the spine, like I'm not going to use all kinds of scientific terms here today, but just anything that will grip the spine to hold it in position. Any of those deep inner stabilizers inside the hips and inside the shoulders. That's going to be a system that is very much reflex based. You could try to work on training those muscles to kick on, but at the end of the day, if your prime movers, like the bigger muscles, go first, and you don't have the proper sequencing and timing to the movements, you're not going to see the benefit of having those deep stabilizers help you out. So the deep stabilizers come first, then your more local stabilizers. Those are the smaller muscles that kind of assist in movement and control through range of motion. Those are going to be more in control of some of our static and dynamic motor control drills, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then you have your global movers, like that's the big stuff. Those are the things, the biceps and triceps, the quads and hamstrings, the things that move our body. This sequence in that order, the deep stabilizers to local stabilizers to global movers, is the correct way that things should fire. But a lot of times, if we don't have the proper mobility in and around joints, we're going to end up just going right to global movers, and we're going to move stuff. We're going to compensate without those deeper stabilizers and the local stabilizers. And that's where we put ourselves in the compromised position as we go through exercise. So here are some stability strategies that we can enact. I've said it a couple of times already. Mobility is a big factor here. If I don't have range of motion in and around the joint, I'm not hearing like the floor as well. If my foot is on the ground, I'm not able to get the feedback to my brain and proprioceptive ability to be able to control my movement. So lack of range of motion is a determining factor to stability. So we need to increase our range of motion, make sure we have good mobility, and then we'll do things like balance or bear crawls, things that are more natural movements that the body was able to do at one time. Like that baby, they learned to stand and to balance, and they got that big old heavy head and tiny body, and they learn to stabilize themselves. Sometimes that's really the first step in one of our stability strategies, is free up the range of motion and then have somebody walk on a balance beam. Now, whether that's the hip or the ankle or the shoulder, whatever it is, we might use different strategies for balance, like bear crawl for the shoulders. We'll use more of like a balance beam for the ankle and the hip. But at the end of the day, it's about getting them to naturally learn to control their body. The tendency for people in this situation is to just go fast. They'll just go as fast as they can, or they won't go fast at all, and they'll be kind of falling back and forth. Our cueing in that is on the beam, balance, try to slow things down and breathe. If you can slow things down and breathe, you can bring things back under control, and you start working on those deeper stabilizers that are maybe not doing what they should for you. And then we get to more of like corrective exercise after that. So once we increase the range of motion, we get them working on some of those balance drills, then we go to more of what's called static motor control. The idea with static motor control is, like, I'll use an example of being in half kneeling and having someone go through a chop. You guys have seen, we've done those in the gym where we do the half kneeling or full kneeling chopping exercise, where it's not necessarily about you rotating your torso. It's more about you maintaining stillness or stiffness in the lower half of your body and creating motion with the upper half. That drill, although it looks like it's an arm exercise, is actually for your hips and your core. It's how your hip and your core are engaged with each other while you have some type of what's called a perturbation through the upper body. Perturbation could be a chop, it could be a lift, it could be a trainer manually trying to move you around a little bit. And the idea is you just got to try to stabilize and not have too much wobble. And the idea there is you're going to statically improve your ability to control yourself in space. If you have, let's just use that same example of half kneeling. If you have a tight hip flexor and you're kind of flexed at the hip in that half kneeling stance, you're going to have a really tough time stabilizing and using the muscles that are supposed to be on. You're going to just use prime movers to tighten up and tense. And you'll see people go to like a neck strategy for something that is really supposed to be about their lower half. So your body's going to compensate around those things that you do poorly at. So if we free up the hip flexor in that example, get them through more range of motion, get you in the proper alignment and position, and then force you to do the chop, not with a ton of weight, just enough to give you some feedback. People respond very quickly to that, and you start to control yourself in space more. Then we get to, once we can establish that, that might be a 2 or 3 week process to kind of get that to stick. Then we go to dynamic motor control. Those are going to look more like regular exercises. Those are the things that we do with the Cook bands. Those are the things that we do as far as like using some equipment for feedback. So stuff like doing the single leg deadlift with the dowel on your back, keeping the dowel touching your head, your back, and your butt the whole way. Like that is actually a upper half maintaining stiffness and stillness while the lower half is moving. It's kind of like the chop, just the other way around. These dynamic motor control exercises are just higher level movements where now we're controlling movement rather than controlling static positions like we did in the half kneeling chop and lift in the static motor control drill. So it progresses from increasing range of motion with mobility and balance, having them work on some natural movement, and then putting them in postures where we have to challenge their balance and stiffness in the lower half or the upper half, to then doing dynamic motor control drills like a single leg deadlift or like a knee hug or anything where I'm trying to we do the drill with the activation of the core with the leg lift, you know, things that look more like everyday patterns. But again, we're always trying to work on sequencing. So when we do something like the pull down to the single leg stance, by pulling down, I get my lats to kick on, my core to kick on, deep stabilizers are engaged, and then you go through hip separation. So instead of, if I don't have that correct sequence, I just go to hip separation. I'm just using prime movers and not stabilizers. So stability training, core training, you know, to kind of recap, it's not about getting a six pack. It's not about how long I can hold a plank for. At the end of the day, a plank is just a simple, you know, movement where I'm just holding myself in place. I'm not really using any kind of timing or sequencing, which is really what motor control and stability is all about. You can have someone who has great range of motion on the table. They have, you know, the ability to hold themselves in a plank position, do glute bridges, do a bunch of external and internal rotation movements with their shoulder. But then when they go to move and go through dynamic athletic activities, stuff starts going wrong. And that's really more, it has a lot more to do with their ability to sequence well and have the right timing to their movements. So we'll kind of finish up with some questions if you guys have any. Hopefully I didn't jump around too much there, and I used some exercise examples without video or pictures. So hopefully it makes sense, because you guys have done a lot of those exercises in the gym. I figure it's pretty clear. But what do you guys think of that as far as, you know, any questions or anything that you feel like you could be working on a little differently?
I know my core is very weak, so
Well,
I'm not stable.
remember yesterday, Eileen, we talked in the mobility strategies workshop, we talked about like making sure the range of motion was there. But then this, it's kind of like there's a step between like what you think you would need to be doing for strengthening those patterns that you're trying to strengthen. So like you were talking about lifting, I think it was was it with the shoulder press or the bench press, or, you know, one arm felt a lot stronger than the other. You know, I think that's the difference here is we got to do this step in between, which is, I think your mobility is good. I think it's more about static motor control right now, getting you to do some of those drills, maybe some loaded carries, things like that, where you just hold the kettlebell and walk around. You know, it's getting the integration between your shoulder and your core and your hips, kind of all of that stuff working together. And it doesn't have to be heavy. You know, a lot of times it just maybe needs to be with a little bit of like length of time, rather than like going super heavy with this stuff. Because if you go heavy, what ends up happening is you just start, all those prime movers kick on and you just compensate, right? So whatever you're not able to hold with the stabilizers, you just start using muscle to do it. And that's where we get ourselves in trouble in everyday life, is when we go to grab a door, or we go to turn and twist and go to pick something up, where our muscles are able to lift it. Like a good analogy is, you can do way more deadlifts than you can do good deadlifts. You can do a bunch of deadlifts poorly, but like there's going to be a point where the form breaks down at some point. And I think what is the form breaking down? It could be just someone's technique is off, but most of the time it's not their technique. It's that they don't have the work capacity, or they don't have the ability to stabilize, you know, that movement, and the timing's off. Right. So that's why our warm-ups really should be designed around this. It should be designed around how can we engage the whole body as a system to be working on the timing, right? Usually we need to increase range of motion, and we got to work on some timing stuff. And that's really all we're talking about.
Right. No,
Good.
thank you. Yes.
Yeah, you got it.
Definitely I work on stability.
So we're going to
Yes.
get, when I add, like I said, about trying to get more of the classes, like more diversity in the classes, I think I'm hoping some of these lunch and learns, and some people will go on and watch the video after, it'll kind of give people, you know, a little bit of motivation around doing some of the classes that might be more movement based, and not just like, hey, I just want to get a good sweat, which is important right now. Everybody wants to do that. But you know, and lift weights. But I think there's a lot we can do, you know, in the way of like just good quality movement training, and mobility and breathing. Like I think we can do a lot, especially in this format. Online, it's a lot easier, especially because I could see you guys. Greg, do you have?
Frank,
Go
I
ahead,
think
Jeff.
the workouts, in the last, I don't know, when you used to do them, you used to key on this right before we got into everything. We would do a lot more stretching, a lot more like, just, mobility stuff, or whether it was like,
The movement prep, like some of the prep. Yeah.
prep stuff.
Yeah.
It seems like now that we just get right into it, like you said, we're building up a sweat, which I feel good. I mean, I feel like I've done something.
Yeah.
But I definitely.
And that's always the challenge, is like, because that's
I know
what
how much
people
time
want.
do you allow for that.
I know.
And you used to kind of gear, like whatever exercises we were going to do, you'd gear that stretch beforehand, whether it was like ankle stretch against the wall or something like that. And I know it took a lot of time up, and it was kind of like, but I feel sometimes like
we got to find a middle ground, because it's like it's either all or nothing. I think that's going to be my intention, and I hope now that we're doing these, it's like we get a chance to talk about these things more and why they're important.
Yeah, no, I did enjoy that. I think I didn't feel as like for the last 2 days I had back pain. I don't know why I had back pain.
Yeah. See,
and if you don't get there early and roll out and do your stretching, so that's part on us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that, I've been hosting these, maybe, I could run the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe, if I can figure that out, or even just get them doing that a little bit differently, like just the start, those first 5 to 10 minutes, just doing some different stuff, and then explaining it. I mean, that's one of the things that as trainers, you don't just want to be a human stopwatch. That's what it's got to be. You're encouraging and you're motivating and you're keeping the time and you're telling them the exercise. But at the same time, I think we should be getting elements of this education into the class too. Like, hey, right before we do that squat, maybe there's a prep move we can do right before that's going to address some mobility and stability. And it's as a break too. An hour's a long time, so you guys need some down, kind of like things to bring your heart rate back under control throughout the class. So, I'm going to kind of watch that a little closer. And like I said, we're going to try to get some more diversity in the classes in there. And we're basically transforming the entire business like within 3 days. So, it was going smooth until this morning. Stuff started getting a little wonky, but we're still working on it. It'll be a work in progress, but I'm hoping by the end of the week we got something pretty solid and dialed in.
Yeah, I think the 8 o'clock option might be.
I think that'd be great.
Get some more people on.
Yep. Well, that's the goal. Like we're just kind of seeing what's taking, and I've got to get them working. So I don't think they're going to have a problem doing 8 a.m. Somebody will jump on it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yep. What's up, Greg?
Kind of going back to like what he was just saying, like, oh, my back's hurting a little bit, or I used to do like some of these exercises beforehand. I think that's where the app is pretty important too. Like if you have your own correctives on there.
Yeah.
Going back to what you were just talking about before, with trying to get the deep stabilizer to kick in first. Sometimes it takes a while. Like when I'm treating somebody, like I have somebody hold until we tire out some of those bigger prime movers first, until we start to feel those stabilizers kick in. Some, like, Kylie, for example, she kicks in right away. But I've had people where I make them hold it for like 3 minutes. Yeah. Now, it's not feasible for like a group class, right? So go into your correctives on the app, do it on your own. I think that'll kind of set everybody up to be a little bit better for the group classes. Yeah, definitely. No, that's a really good point. And, like the correctives on, like Jeff, I don't know if do we have you set up on the app? Actually, you too, Eileen. Do you have the Trainerize app?
I don't know if I have a Trainerize app.
Yeah. So I'm going to make sure they reach out to you again. We did that at the beginning of last week. I wanted to make sure everybody had a program.
You sent it in an email?
I don't think so. I think they should have reached out. So I'll double check on that.
They? Justin or
Mike? I think Mike is on it.
Oh.
So if Mike sent you something with it, or it might have, they may have just sent you the invite. Like if they just set up your account on Trainerize, it might have just come right from Trainerize, and you would.
That's what it's called, Trainerize.
Yeah, it's
probably
I'll go look for it.
Resend the link, I would think.
What's that, Greg?
Probably set up already where
Yeah.
resend the link.
I could take a look I could actually take a look right now.
I was on it yesterday and it looked like they added a lot more people to it. So I think most people from the gym were probably added.
Yeah, there's a ton of people on there. Let me see. I'm going to see if you're in there, Jeff. At this point, I could probably pause the video or the recording. Let me do that. All right,